The empty space around them. Frost clung to the grass outside the settlement church that late autumn morning. Inside, families filled the wooden pews like water finding its level, clustering together in familiar patterns. Children fidgeted in Sunday clothes. Women smoothed calico skirts. Men cleared their throats for the first hymn. In the back corner, 3 figures sat alone. Jacob Morrison kept his eyes forward, shoulders tight beneath his worn jacket. His daughter Sarah, 8 years old, gripped his hand with unnecessary force. On his other side, 6-year-old Daniel swung his feet nervously, the toes of his 2 large boots scraping the floor. 2 feet of empty pew stretched on either side of them, a gap that might as well have been a canyon. Nobody slid closer. Nobody offered to share a hymnal. Jacob had seen this before in other towns, other churches, the slight stiffening when strangers appeared, the way conversations dropped to whispers, the invisible walls communities built to protect their own. He'd learned not to expect different, learned to armor himself against the cold shoulder, the turned back, the polite distance that said clearer than words, "You don't belong here." But his children hadn't learned that lesson yet. Sarah's anxiety showed in her white knuckles. Daniel's foot swinging betrayed his nervous energy, his need for someone to notice him, include him, smile at him. Across the aisle and 3 rows forward, someone did notice. Laura Brennan sat alone in her pew, a widow in her late 30s with graying brown hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet. Other families greeted her warmly as they passed, touching her shoulder, nodding respect. But she sat by herself, as she had for 3 years since Thomas died. Her gaze found the isolated family in the back, lingered on the little girl's threadbare dress, carefully mended but thin. The boy's oversized boots, probably bought secondhand to allow for growth. The father's rigid posture, defensive and weary at once. Something in Laura's expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or memory of her own loneliness reflected in strangers' faces. When the hymn began, Jacob didn't have a hymnal. He mouthed words he remembered from childhood, trying to set an example for his children. Sarah leaned against his side, seeking warmth. Daniel's foot swinging slowed, then stopped. The service lasted an hour. Pastor Williams spoke about welcome and fellowship, about loving your neighbor. Jacob felt the irony like a stone in his chest. When the final prayer ended, families rose in a tide of conversation and laughter. They flowed together naturally, arranging Sunday dinners, discussing the week's weather, planning barn raisings and quilting circles. The Morrison family stood like stones in a stream. The current parted around them. Jacob nodded to no one in particular and guided his children toward the door. Sarah's hand trembled in his. Daniel pressed close to his leg, but Laura Brennan watched them go. She remained in her pew as others departed, her eyes tracking the lonely family's exit. Her hands folded in her lap, thumbs rubbing against each other the way they did when she was working through a decision. By the time she rose and smoothed her skirt, her expression had settled, determined, decided. She followed them into the churchyard. Sunday dinner at my table. Laura caught them before they could disappear down the road. Her approach was direct, crossing the frost-touched grass with purpose. "Excuse me," she called. Jacob turned, instinctively positioning himself slightly in front of his children. His expression shuttered closed, wary. Laura stopped a respectful distance away. "I'm Laura Brennan. I noticed you're new to our settlement. Jacob Morrison." His voice was clipped, offering nothing more. These your children? Sarah and Daniel." The words came grudgingly, but he couldn't very well refuse to introduce them. Laura smiled at the children. Sarah half hid behind her father's coat. Daniel stared with wide eyes at this woman who'd actually spoken to them. "I have a proposition," Laura said, addressing Jacob directly. "Sunday dinner at my table. I cook too much for one, and these children look like they could use a proper meal." Jacob's jaw tightened. The bluntness could have been insulting, but something in her tone, matter-of-fact kindness, without a trace of pity, made it bearable. "Barely. We manage fine," he said, I'm sure you do. Laura's expression didn't change. But I'm not offering charity. Mr. Morrison, I'm offering hospitality. There's a difference. There is. Her voice held quiet certainty. Charity makes a man feel small. Hospitality treats him as an equal. I'd appreciate the company. Truth be told, my table's been too quiet since my husband passed. Sarah tugged on Jacob's sleeve. He looked down to find his daughter's eyes pleading silently. Daniel had edged forward, drawn to Laura's warmth like a plant turning toward sun. Jacob's throat worked. Every instinct screamed that kindness came with strings attached, that small towns extracted payment for every offered hand. But they'd been eating beans and cornbread for 3 weeks in that cold dugout. His children needed more. Needed warmth and full bellies and perhaps even a friendly voice. Needed it more than he needed his pride intact. We'd be obliged, he heard himself say. Laura's smile reached her eyes. Good. My homestead is a mile past the crossroads. Eastern Road. White fence. Garden still showing chrysanthemums against the frost. Say around 1 o'clock. Jacob nodded, not trusting more words. I'll see you then. Laura touched her bonnet in farewell and walked back toward the church, where other women waited by their wagons. Jacob stood frozen, Sarah still gripping his hand. Daniel pressed against his leg. They watched Laura rejoin the community, saw her exchange words with Mrs. Fletcher and young Mary Carson. Sarah's voice was small. Is she really going to feed us? Seems so. Why? Daniel asked with a child's directness. Jacob looked down at his son. Why indeed in his experience? Nobody did something for nothing. Kindness always had a price, revealed later when you'd already lowered your guard. But those chrysanthemums Laura mentioned, she'd noticed details, offered them as landmarks, as if assuming they'd actually come, as if her invitation was genuine. Don't know, son. Jacob admitted, Guess we'll find out. They walked toward their dugout on the settlement's edge, Sarah chattering with barely contained excitement about what might be served for dinner. Daniel skipped ahead, then back, energy renewed by hope. Jacob felt the weight of commitment settling on his shoulders. He'd accepted. Couldn't back out now without looking ungrateful, without disappointing his children who were already counting hours until 1 o'clock. There was no going back from this. The thought terrified him more than he cared to admit. The weight they carry. That evening, Jacob lay on his thin bedroll in the dugout, staring at the dirt ceiling. Sarah and Daniel slept nearby, huddled together for warmth under their shared quilt. Lamplight flickered across mud-packed walls, casting shadows that danced and retreated. Cold seeped through everywhere. The dugout was temporary shelter, never meant for winter. But winter was coming regardless, and Jacob's wages from occasional work on the McGregor land wouldn't stretch to proper housing. He turned his head, watching his children sleep. Sarah's face had lost some of its pinched anxiety in slumber. Daniel's mouth hung slightly open. One small hand curled beneath his chin. They deserved better than this. Jacob closed his eyes against memory, but it came anyway. Martha's death 3 years ago. The baby daughter who followed her within hours. The way their previous town had whispered bad luck. Cursed. Some defect in the man that killed his wife in childbirth. His grief had made them uncomfortable, so they'd made him unwelcome. Before that, another settlement where refusing to sell his land to the local cattle baron had marked him as troublesome. Before that, a town where being a stranger was crime enough. He'd learned the pattern. Communities protected their own, and strangers never qualified. No matter how hard you worked, how quiet you kept, how carefully you followed their unwritten rules. The door stayed closed. Eventually you stopped knocking and moved on. That's what he'd been doing, moving. Always moving. Keeping ahead of rejection before it could dig too deep. But tonight, Daniel had asked about pie. Sarah had fallen asleep, whispering about the nice lady's house, wondering if there would be books. His children needed more than protection from hurt. They needed friends, laughter, normalcy. They needed to belong somewhere, to some community. even if past experience taught him that belonging was an illusion that shattered under pressure. Jacob sat up carefully, not wanting to wake them. He added precious kindling to the small stove, watching flames catch and spread. The heat barely reached the far corners of the dugout. Outside, autumn wind rattled the door. First frost tonight. More to come. Winter would be brutal in this shelter. They'd need help credit at the store, winter work, perhaps even charity despite his pride. They'd need neighbors. The realization sat heavy in his chest. Laura Brennan's invitation wasn't just about one Sunday dinner, it was a test, a threshold. If he accepted her hospitality, he was choosing to try again, choosing to risk his heart and his children's hearts on the possibility that this settlement might be different, that this woman might actually mean her kindness. Pa. Sarah's sleepy voice startled him. You okay? Fine, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. Will there really be pie tomorrow? Tomorrow. She'd already claimed it, already counted it as certain. Maybe, Jacob said. Sarah smiled and burrowed deeper into the quilt. I think there will be. She seemed like a pie kind of lady. After his daughter's breathing steadied again, Jacob lay back down. The word maybe echoed in his mind. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like a hedge or an evasion. It sounded almost like hope. Outside, the wind promised winter's hardship. Inside, Jacob made a choice he'd sworn never to make again. He'd show up at Laura Brennan's table tomorrow. He'd let his children taste kindness. He'd risk believing that somewhere, somehow, a door might actually open instead of slam shut. The thought terrified him, but watching his children sleep cold and lonely terrified him more. The table set for 4 Laura Brennan's homestead appeared exactly as described. White fence in good repair. Garden beds showing the last defiant chrysanthemums of autumn. The house itself was modest but solid real timber construction. Glass windows. A chimney trailing wood smoke into the November sky. Jacob approached slowly, Sarah and Daniel flanking him. They'd washed in cold water that morning, put on their cleanest clothes. Sarah had plaited her own hair with trembling fingers. Daniel had scrubbed his face until it shone. They all knew what this meant, even if nobody spoke it aloud. Laura opened the door before Jacob could knock. She wore a simple blue dress with a flour-dusted apron. Her hair pinned back, practical and neat. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. Right on time, she said. Come in. Come in. Leave your coats by the door. The interior struck Jacob silent. A real wooden floor. Not dirt. A pot-bellied stove radiating warmth. Shelves lined with books and dishes. And the table set for 4 with real china plates. Cloth napkins. Wildflowers in a mason jar centerpiece. Sarah's hand found Jacob's, squeezing hard. He glanced down to see tears in his daughter's eyes. It's beautiful, Sarah whispered. Laura heard. Thank you, dear. Took me years to make it feel like home. Now sit, please. Dinner's nearly ready. The meal unfolded like something from a dream Jacob had forgotten he'd once had. Roasted chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans from Laura's summer garden, bread still warm from the oven. Laura served generous portions without commenting on how quickly the children ate. She asked questions that showed genuine interest. What brings you to the settlement, Mr. Morrison? Work, Jacob said carefully. Heard McGregor needed hands for harvest, and after harvest. Haven't decided yet. Laura nodded, not pressing. She turned to Sarah. You helped your brother wash up this morning. Didn't you? I can tell by how careful his hair's been combed. Sarah ducked her head, pleased. Yes, ma'am. That's good sistering. My older sister used to do the same for me when we were small. You have a sister. Sarah's interest sparked. Had she passed some years back. But I remember how she'd make sure I looked presentable for church, even when we were poor as dirt. Laura's smile was soft with memory. Family takes care of family. After the meal, and yes, there was pie, apple with cinnamon. Laura brought out paper and pencils. I thought the children might enjoy drawing while we grown folks talk. Or there are books, if you prefer. Sarah's hand trembled as she touched the book spines. You read, ma'am. I do, and please, call me Laura. Ma'am makes me feel old as hills. Laura. Sarah tested the name carefully. Do you? Could I maybe borrow one? Any child who loves books is welcome to mine. Take your pick. Jacob watched his daughter choose a worn copy of fairy tales, watched her cradle it like treasure. Daniel had already claimed the paper and pencils, tongue poking out in concentration as he drew. This was kindness without agenda, warmth without strings. Everything Jacob had convinced himself didn't exist. Laura poured coffee for the adults, settled across from Jacob. The children seem well-mannered. Their mother raised them right. She's gone. 3 years now. Laura's expression held understanding without pity. My Thomas has been gone the same. Pneumonia took him quick. Sometimes I think that was a mercy he didn't suffer long. They sat in companionable quiet, sipping coffee while the children occupied themselves peacefully. Sarah read aloud softly to Daniel, who'd abandoned drawing to listen. The house felt warm, lived in, safe. Jacob felt something crack in his chest, something he'd kept frozen for self-protection. When they finally rose to leave, Laura walked them to the door. Next Sunday, she asked casually. Jacob hesitated. This was the moment to retreat, to thank her politely and never return, to protect himself and his children from inevitable disappointment. Sarah looked up at him, eyes pleading silently. Daniel clutched his drawings. Next Sunday. Jacob agreed. Laura's smile could have warmed the whole territory. Good. I'll see you at church. Then, walking home in the late afternoon light, Sarah clutched her borrowed book. Daniel chattered about the chicken, the pie, the nice lady with the drawings. Jacob said little, but his shoulders had lost some of their rigid tension. Behind them, Laura stood in her doorway, watching until they disappeared from sight. She touched the door frame with one hand, as if steadying herself. One door opens, she murmured to the empty yard. One small door. Then she went inside to wash dishes, already planning next week's menu. Roots in frozen ground. 3 Sundays passed like water finding new channels. Each week, the Morrison family appeared at Laura's door. Each week. The pattern deepened shared meals. Quiet conversation. Children's laughter growing less restrained. Sarah had borrowed 4 books now, returning each with careful reverence before selecting the next. Daniel brought his drawings to show Laura, beaming when she praised his improving skill. Jacob found himself arriving early to help with heavy chores, splitting wood, fixing a loose shutter, tasks that needed man's hands. Laura accepted his help with the same matter-of-fact grace she'd shown from the start. No excessive gratitude, no suggestion of debt, just partnership, as natural as breathing. The 4th Sunday. Daniel showed Laura a drawing unprompted. It's you, he announced. See, that's your house, and the flowers, and you standing by the door. Laura studied the childish sketch, her eyes growing suspiciously bright. It's beautiful. Daniel. May I keep it? Really, I'll hang it right here. She placed it on her mantle, centering it carefully. There. Now my house has proper decoration. Jacob watched his son's face illuminate with pride. Daniel hadn't volunteered anything to anyone since Martha died. Hadn't trusted strangers with his creations, his small, precious offerings. But Laura wasn't a stranger anymore. The realization struck Jacob with unexpected force. Between Sundays, life continued its harsh rhythm. Jacob worked when McGregor had tasks, stretched their supplies when he didn't. But at the general store one Thursday, something shifted. Mary Carson approached Sarah, who was studying penny candy she couldn't afford. Your pa works hard on the McGregor land. I hear, Sarah startled. Yes, ma'am. We're glad for the extra hands. Mary's smile was genuine. Tell him the barn raising's next month. We'll need good workers. It was acknowledgement, small, but real, that night. Sarah reported the encounter with wonder in her voice. She knew your name. Pa. She knew you worked for McGregor. Seems so. Think they're starting to see us. Jacob considered his answer carefully. Maybe Laura's acceptance is showing them we're not so dangerous after all. At church the following Sunday, Jim Hardesty nodded to Jacob. Not a greeting, exactly, but recognition. The banker's wife still sniffed disapprovingly when she saw Laura collect the Morrison family after the service, but young Tom Fletcher smiled at Daniel. Slowly, like ice melting in March, the settlement's cold front began to crack. Laura's story emerged in pieces across those weeks. She'd been married at 19, widowed at 35, no children, though she'd wanted them desperately. Thomas had been a good man, steady and kind, but pneumonia showed no mercy. The community surrounded me when he died. She told Jacob one evening while the children played outside. Brought food, helped with harvest, sat with me through the worst grief. That's what community does. If you're already one of them, Jacob said quietly. Laura met his eyes. You have to give them a chance to prove otherwise. I've given chances before. And been hurt. I understand. She refilled his coffee. But staying locked away hurts too. Just slower. Your children need more than safety. Jacob, they need belonging. He couldn't argue. Watching Sarah and Daniel through the window, his daughter reading aloud beneath the chrysanthemum bush. His son drawing in the dirt with a stick, he saw how they'd blossomed here. 3 months ago, they'd been pinched and wary. Now color touched Sarah's cheeks. Daniel's laughter came easily. That night, walking back to their dugout under cold stars, Sarah asked the question that had been building for weeks. But do you think we'll stay? Jacob stopped walking. His children turned to face him, matching expressions of hope and fear. Stay. The word implied permanence, roots, commitment. Everything he'd taught himself to avoid. But he thought of Laura's table, of Daniel's drawing on her mantle, of Sarah's borrowed books and the way she'd started smiling at other children at church, of the nod from Jim Hardesty, the smile from Tom Fletcher, the slow thaw of a community learning to accept strangers. Maybe, he said, but this time. The word didn't sound like a hedge. It sounded like a door opening, just a crack. Sarah's smile could have lit the darkness. I hope we do. Pa, I really hope we do. Daniel grabbed his hand. Me too. They walked on through the cold night. But Jacob felt something warm in his chest, something he'd thought died with Martha. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, impossible to kill completely. Pride's prison winter arrived with teeth bared. Early December brought snow that didn't melt, wind that found every crack in the dugout's walls. Work on the McGregor land ended with the frozen ground. Jacob counted his saved wages by lamplight. Enough for maybe 6 weeks if they ate carefully. After that, nothing. He'd need credit at the general store, need to beg for winter work, need to reveal just how precarious their situation was, need help. The word stuck in his throat like a bone. Sunday morning. He sent Sarah to Laura's with a message he was feeling poorly. Wouldn't make dinner today. It wasn't entirely a lie. Pride had made him sick, twisted his stomach into knots. Sarah returned with a basket of bread and preserves, concern in her young eyes. Laura says she hopes you feel better soon. Pa, she seemed worried. Jacob couldn't meet his daughter's gaze. He was avoiding the one person who'd shown them genuine kindness, and they both knew it. Tuesday afternoon. Hoofbeats approached the dugout. Jacob looked up from his meager fire to see Laura dismounting from her wagon. She knocked, then entered without waiting for invitation. Her eyes swept the space, the thin walls, the inadequate stove. Sarah and Daniel huddled together for warmth despite the afternoon hour. "Leftovers," she said briskly, setting down a heavy basket. "Waste not, want not." They both knew she'd cooked specifically for them. Laura turned to Jacob, her expression unreadable. "There's a bunkhouse on my property. Thomas built it for seasonal workers. It's been empty since he died. Real stove, actual floor, windows. You could winter there." Jacob's defenses slammed up like a gate. "I don't accept charity. It's not charity." Laura's voice stayed level. "I need help with winter chores. Wood chopping, snow clearing, fence repairs. You need shelter. It's trade. We manage fine. Do you, for the first time?" Real anger flashed in Laura's eyes. "Your children are cold. Jacob, look at them. They're huddled together in the middle of the day because this place can't hold heat worth a damn. That's not your concern, isn't it?" Laura stepped closer, voice dropping but intensity increasing. "I've fed them every Sunday for months. I've watched them start to heal, start to hope. You think I'm going to stand by while pride freezes them through winter? My pride is my business. And their welfare, is that your business too? Or is your pride worth more than your children's?" Warmth. The words hit like a slap. Jacob's jaw worked, fury and shame warring in his chest. "You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Every time I accept help, it comes with strings. Every kindness extracts payment later. Every open hand has a closed fist behind it." The words tore from somewhere deep. "I've learned that lesson enough times. I'm not them." Laura's voice gentled slightly but remained firm. "Whatever hurt you before, whatever towns rejected you, whatever people used your need against you, I'm not them. How do I know that you don't?" She held his gaze. "That's what trust means, Jacob. You can't know for certain. You just have to choose to believe." Silence stretched between them. Outside, wind rattled the dugout's door. Inside, Sarah and Daniel watched their father with frightened eyes. Then Sarah spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Pa, I'm cold at night." Daniel cries. The admission shattered something in Jacob. His daughter shouldn't have to beg for basic warmth. His son shouldn't suffer for his father's wounded pride. He looked at Laura, saw determination mixed with compassion in her eyes, saw genuine care, not manipulation, saw someone offering help because she could, not because she wanted something in return. 1 month, he said hoarsely, until I find other work. Laura's expression softened. 1 month? They both knew it was a lie. Winter would keep them there longer. But the lie let Jacob save face, and that mattered. "I'll need help moving your things," Laura said practically. "Tomorrow morning work for you." Jacob nodded, not trusting his voice. After she left, Sarah hugged him tight. "Thank you, Pa." Daniel pressed against his other side. "Will the bunkhouse have windows, real ones?" "Yes, son, real ones." That night, Jacob lay awake while his children finally slept warm in anticipation. He'd agreed to more than shelter. He'd agreed to proximity, to daily contact, to letting Laura deeper into their lives. He'd agreed to trust. The thought terrified him, but his children's cold hands terrified him more. The blizzard's gift. The bunkhouse was simple but solid. 1 room with bunks built into the wall. A pot-bellied stove that actually heated the space. A real floor beneath their feet. Sarah cried when she saw the quilts Laura had laid out. Daniel explored every corner with joy. Jacob stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. "It's good enough," Laura asked. "It's more than good. It's—" He couldn't finish. "It's what neighbors do." She touched his arm briefly. "Now get settled. I'll expect you for morning coffee tomorrow." Morning coffee became routine. Evening meals happened naturally. Laura cooked. Jacob and the children appeared. Nobody questioned the pattern. The children gravitated to Laura's main house after their chores, drawn by her warmth and her bookshelf and her steady, gentle presence. Jacob found unexpected satisfaction in useful work. He split wood for both homes, repaired Laura's barn door, reinforced fences against winter storms. She thanked him genuinely, treated his labor as valuable rather than debt payment. The dynamic felt balanced, respectful. December deepened. Jacob watched his children transform. Sarah lost her pinched anxiety entirely. Daniel laughed freely. They talked about spring planting, about learning to read better, about tomorrow and next week and next month as if permanence was certain. And Jacob found himself thinking about Laura between tasks. Her steady calm, her quick humor, the way she hummed while cooking, the way she treated his children with affection but never tried to replace their mother, the way she looked at him sometimes, with something warmer than friendship in her eyes. It confused and terrified and tempted him in equal measure. Then the blizzard hit, 3 days before Christmas. Snow began falling thick and fast. By evening, wind howled like wolves. By midnight, drifts climbed past the windows. They were trapped. The second day, supplies ran low. The third morning, the bunkhouse stove started smoking badly. Jacob climbed to the roof in near whiteout conditions, trying to clear the blocked chimney. Ice made the roof treacherous. Wind threatened to throw him off. He couldn't see, could barely breathe. But his children needed heat. Get down before you kill yourself. Laura's voice cut through the storm. She stood below with a lantern, face white with fear. Chimney's blocked, and you'll break your neck. Get down now. Jacob half climbed, half slid from the roof. Laura grabbed his arm, steadying him. Inside, she ordered. All of you, my house, now. She settled the children by her fire, wrapped them in quilts, fed them hot soup. Then she turned to Jacob with blazing eyes. You don't have to do everything alone, she said quietly, intensely. That's what you're not understanding. Asking for help isn't weakness. I didn't want to bother you. Bother me, Jacob. You could have died on that roof. Left your children orphaned because you were too proud to knock on my door. He had no answer. She was right. Laura's expression softened. Sit, please. They sat by the fire while the children dozed. The blizzard raged outside, but inside felt safe, warm, protected. Talk to me, Laura said. Really talk. What are you so afraid of? And Jacob, exhausted, cold. His defenses stripped by near disaster, finally told her everything. Martha's death and the baby daughter who didn't survive. The town that whispered cursed until they had to leave. The settlement before that, where his refusal to sell land marked him as troublesome. The one before that, where being a stranger was crime enough. Every time I let people close, they hurt us. He finished hoarsely. Every time I trust, it ends in rejection. I'm just trying to protect my children from more pain. Laura listened without interrupting, when he fell silent. She spoke carefully. When Thomas died, this community surrounded me. They brought food, helped with harvest, sat with me through the worst grief. They taught me that belonging isn't about never needing help. It's about letting people care when you do. She leaned forward, eyes intent. You think you're protecting Sarah and Daniel by staying isolated? But you're teaching them that people can't be trusted. That home is nowhere. That love always ends in loss. Is that really the lesson you want them to learn? The words pierced deep. Jacob looked at his children sleeping peacefully by Laura's fire. Saw how Sarah's face had lost its constant worry. How Daniel no longer startled at every sound. They were healing here, growing, becoming children again instead of survivors. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. How to trust. How to belong. Laura's smile was gentle. One day at a time. Jacob, one Sunday dinner, one barn raising, one Christmas together. That's all it takes, one foot in front of the other. toward people instead of away from them. He met her eyes, saw patience there, and kindness, and something deeper that made his heart stutter. "I'm staying," he said. The words felt like a vow. "Not just for 1 month. We're staying." "Good." Laura's hand found his, squeezed briefly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Outside, the blizzard howled. Inside, something between them shifted and settled. Not quite spoken, not quite acknowledged, but present nonetheless. A promise forming, a future taking shape. Sarah stirred in her sleep, murmured, "Home." Laura and Jacob looked at each other. Neither spoke, but both understood. Yes, home. Before God and settlement alike when the blizzard cleared. Word somehow spread that the Morrison family had weathered it at Laura Brennan's house. At church that Sunday, the reception differed. Jim Hardesty greeted Jacob by name. "Heard you near killed yourself clearing that chimney. Glad Laura had sense to stop you." Tom Fletcher clapped his shoulder. "Barn raising for the new minister come January thaw. We need your hands." Mary Carson invited Sarah to sit with her daughter. "You girls can share a hymnal." The change was subtle but unmistakable. Doors opening, one after another. Come January, the settlement gathered for the barn raising. Jacob worked alongside men who now shared their names, their tools, their water. They debated building techniques, joked about the weather, accepted his suggestions without suspicion. At noon, the women brought food. Laura made sure everyone saw her serve Jacob first, honoring his labor publicly. Mrs. Fletcher watched with pursed lips but said nothing. That afternoon, Jacob straightened from nailing boards to see his children playing with others. Sarah and the Carson girl read under a tree. Daniel ran with boys his age, whooping with joy. The sound of his son's laughter, unguarded and free, nearly brought Jacob to his knees. This was what Laura had been building. One meal at a time. One introduction at a time. One gentle push toward community after another. December arrived again, a full year since that first terrible Sunday alone in the back pew. The settlement planned a Christmas celebration at the church. Laura mentioned it casually over breakfast. "You'll come. Of course, the children will love it." Jacob set down his coffee. "Laura," when she looked up, something cautious in her eyes. "This year," he said slowly, "everything that's happened." "That was you. Wasn't it you orchestrated all of it?" "I don't know what you mean." "The dinner invitations. The way you made sure people saw us together. Talking to Mary Carson, to the Hardesties, making us visible, acceptable." He shook his head in wonder. "You planned it all." Laura's expression softened. "I opened doors. You had to choose to walk through them. They had to choose to follow my example." She reached across the table, touched his hand briefly. "Community can't be forced. Jacob, it can only be offered and accepted and built together." He caught her hand before she could withdraw it. Why go to all that trouble for strangers?" "You weren't strangers. You were a lonely family who needed welcome, and I—" Her voice caught. "I was a lonely widow who needed purpose. Seems we helped each other." "Laura Brennan." Jacob stood, still holding her hand. "I need to ask you something." "What? Will you come to the Christmas celebration with me as more than my landlady Barm? Color." Touched her cheeks. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet, but I will be soon." He smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Wanted to give you fair warning." Laura's answering smile could have lit the whole territory. "Then yes, Jacob Morrison, I'll come with you." Christmas morning dawned cold and clear. The church was transformed with evergreen boughs and candles. Families filled the pews in their Sunday best. Jacob and his children didn't sit in the back. They sat in the middle section, surrounded by people who greeted them warmly. Sarah wore a new dress gifted by Mary Carson, Daniel had boots that actually fit, courtesy of the Hardesties. After Pastor Williams finished his sermon about welcome and second chances, Jacob did something that terrified him. He stood. "Pastor, may I have a moment?" The room quieted. Every eye turned toward him. Jacob stepped into the aisle, his heart pounding. But he'd learned this year that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing love despite it. "Laura Brennan," he said clearly. She looked up from her pew, eyes wide. "A year ago, I came to this settlement expecting nothing but cold shoulders and closed doors. You gave me warmth and welcome." His voice grew stronger. "You gave my children safety and hope. You taught me that community isn't something you're born into. It's something built one open door at a time." He moved to stand before her pew, aware of the entire congregation watching. "You taught me how to trust again, how to belong, how to believe in tomorrow." Jacob dropped to one knee. Sarah gasped. Daniel bounced with excitement. "Would you marry me?" Jacob asked. "Would you make us a real family before God in this settlement that you've taught to welcome strangers?" Laura's eyes shone with tears, but her voice was steady, carrying across the silent church. "Yes." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, even Mrs. Fletcher dabbing at her eyes. Sarah and Daniel ran to embrace both adults, and suddenly it was real. They were a family, blessed and witnessed and celebrated. Pastor Williams beamed. "Well then, seems we'll be having a wedding after Christmas." The celebration that followed was joyful and loud, but Jacob barely noticed the noise. He stood with Laura's hand in his children pressed close, and felt something settle deep in his chest. Peace. Belonging. Home. Finally. After so many years of running, he'd found where he was meant to be. The open door. The wedding happened in January, after the new minister's barn was completed. Simple but joyful, the church packed with the community that had once shunned them. Pastor Williams spoke of second chances, of how one person's courage to care could transform an entire community's heart. Laura wore a simple blue dress. Jacob wore his best shirt, pressed by Sarah with fierce concentration. Daniel carried the rings on a small pillow sewn by Mary Carson. When they spoke their vows, Sarah cried happily. When they kissed, the congregation cheered. When they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. The Morrison-Brennan family was complete. The celebration afterward filled Laura's house, their house now, with laughter and food and warmth. Neighbors brought gifts, offered congratulations, welcomed Jacob officially into the fold. Jim Hardesty shook his hand. "Glad you stayed, son." Tom Fletcher grinned. "Knew Laura would civilize you eventually." Even Mrs. Fletcher unbent enough to say, "Your children are well-mannered. You've done right by them." As evening approached and guests departed, Jacob and Laura stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard with the Carson kids. Daniel's laughter rang clear. Sarah's smile was unguarded. "You orchestrated all of this," Jacob said quietly. "Every step, every introduction, every moment that led here." Laura leaned against his shoulder. "I just opened a door. You had to choose to walk through it. They had to choose to follow my example." She looked up at him. "Community can't be forced. Jacob, it can only be offered and accepted and built together. You make it sound simple." "It is simple, not easy, but simple." Her hand found his. One meal, one kindness, one open door at a time. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The Morrison-Brennan household settled into rhythms both old and new. Jacob worked the land with other men. Laura tended her garden with Sarah's help. Daniel attended the new school the settlement built. But the true test came one Sunday morning in March. New faces appeared at church, a young family, ragged from travel, sitting alone in the back pew. The husband held his wife's hand too tight. Their children were thin and wary. Jacob watched other families flow around them like water around stones, saw the gap of empty space on either side. recognized the defensive posture, the wounded pride, the desperate hope hiding behind resigned eyes. He leaned toward Laura. "Should we?" She smiled. "Yes." After the service, they approached together. The young father tensed, positioned himself protectively in front of his family. "I'm Jacob Morrison," Jacob said gently. "This is my wife, Laura. We noticed you're new to the settlement." The man's eyes held wary recognition. "Ben Carter, my wife, Emma, our kids. Welcome." Laura's warmth was genuine. "We know how hard it is. Being new in a strange place. Would you join us for Sunday dinner? I always cook too much. And children are always welcome at our table." Emma Carter's eyes filled with tears. Ben's throat worked, pride and need warring visibly. Their oldest daughter, maybe 7 years old, tugged her father's sleeve with silent pleading. Jacob knew that moment, recognized it, had lived it. "Please," he added quietly, "let us help. Someone did the same for us once. It made all the difference." Ben Carter looked at his family, then at Jacob and Laura. Whatever he saw in their faces decided him. "We'd be obliged," he said hoarsely. Laura smiled. "Good. Our homestead is a mile past the crossroads." As she gave directions, Jacob caught Sarah's eye. His daughter understood immediately. She approached the Carter children with a gentle smile, introduced herself, began talking about books and drawings. Daniel joined in, chattering about the school, the friends he'd made. Community spreading like ripples in water, welcome extending, doors opening. That afternoon, the Carter family sat at the Morrison-Brennan table. Emma wept quietly at the abundance. Ben's shoulders gradually relaxed. The children ate with the focused intensity of those who'd been hungry too long. After the meal, Laura offered books. Jacob showed Ben the barn, mentioned work opportunities. Sarah read to the Carter children. Daniel shared his drawings. When they left at dusk, promises had been made. Next Sunday, and the Sunday after, and after that, standing in the doorway, watching another lonely family walk toward hope, Jacob felt the circle complete. "We were them," he said softly. "We were," Laura agreed. "And someone cared enough to help. Now we do the same. Now we do the same." The next Sunday, Jacob held the church door open as families entered. The Hardistys, the Carsons, the Fletchers, and the Carters, who hesitated before entering. "Come on in," Jacob said warmly. "There's room for everyone." Ben Carter gripped his hand briefly in thanks. The family entered. Jacob held the door open as more people passed through. His family, his community, his home. Finally, Laura approached with Sarah and Daniel. She paused, smiled up at him. "Ready?" "Ready." They entered together, the door swinging shut behind them. But warmth spilled out into the cold morning anyway, light and welcome and the promise that here, in this place, doors stayed open. Inside, they took their seats surrounded by friends, by family both blood and chosen. The service began. Voices rose in song, and in the back pew, the Carter family sang too. Tentative, but trying, alone today. Perhaps, but not forever, because sometimes one open door changes everything. Sometimes, all it takes is someone brave enough to offer welcome, and someone desperate enough to accept it. Sometimes, that's how community begins. One door, one meal, one family at a time.